Hello, hello. It's a beautiful day. Can't you see? But we're here inside. Without the car, I am struggling to find time, to make time to go outside and shoot. So most of these videos will be inside. They'll continue to be like that until I find a proper rhythm of going outside and shooting. Because the weather is becoming so nice that being cooped up inside to speak about this might not be the best. But today for discussion, we have Butcher's Crossing by John Williams. So recently was discussed Stoner by John Williams, but for now it's Butcher's Crossing. This is one of his earlier novels. It was written in the early 60s. I think this was the second novel that he wrote, and it's considered an anti-Western in many ways. Anti-Western would be a Western novel that kind of subverts conceptions about the traditional Western novel, the traditional outlaw, sheriff, Indian characters, all of that. The anti-Western that John Williams has written is much more of a realistic Western. It's a realistic portrayal of a time period, but a very distinct time period. The late 19th century. Close, not exactly, but close to a similar time period, just a bit earlier, I would say 2 decades earlier from Dennis Johnson's Train Dreams. So this is, once again, a period of rapid change. And this is a theme in this novel. Okay. Now, the novel starts with, quote, a passage by Ralph Waldo Emerson. Emerson, one of my favorite American authors. Look at this chewed up book. Ralph Waldo Emerson. Am I so cruel? Am I cruel or am I kind to this book because of how much I have abused it like this? Is that a sign of cruelty or of love? I bought that book used, so it was already quite, it already had gone through some stuff, but, look at it, it's kind of fallen apart. I have another copy of Emerson's writings, not with me now, but a much bigger book, a much more complete set of Emerson's writings. Now, Ralph Waldo Emerson was a very prominent, one of the most important figures in American literature in the 19th century, especially towards American intellectual thought and development. His writings are, I think, quite integral still to the American ethos. And people can understand quite a lot about Americans in America from Ralph Waldo Emerson. Now, one of Emerson's first major works was titled Nature, and this is a passage that opens up our novel Butcher's Crossing. Everything that has life gives sign of satisfaction, and the cattle that lie on the ground seem to have great and tranquil thoughts. These halcyons may be looked for with a little more assurance in that pure October weather, which we distinguish by the name of the Indian summer. The day immeasurably long sleeps over the broad hills and warm wide fields. To have lived through all its sunny hours seems longevity enough. The solitary places do not seem quite lonely. At the gates of the forest, the surprised man of the world is forced to leave his city estimates of the great and small, wise and foolish. The knapsack of custom falls off his back. With the first step he takes into these precincts, here is sanctity which shames our religions, and reality which discredits our heroes. Here we find nature, to be the circumstance which dwarfs every other circumstance, and judges, like a god, all men that come to her. So that was Nature by Ralph Waldo Emerson. He wrote that quite early in his career. This was one of the essays that brought him quite a lot of attention and really sparked and spurred his career. Personally, Nature, I find it to be not the essay that I get the most from with Ralph Waldo Emerson. However, I am due perhaps for a reread in that essay. I find his later series that come after Nature are much more meditative, and they really touch myself. But we're going to try not to talk too much about Emerson as much as we can for this video. However, undoubtedly he'll prop up again, because he's actually himself, his writing, it not only impacted the writer John Williams, and we can see this quite clearly, but also within the story, Emerson's writings play a role. There's also a passage by The Confidence Man, a passage from The Confidence Man by Herman Melville. Now, the Melville connection, Melville himself has a connection to Emerson. Melville in many ways was an acolyte of Emerson, but also someone who rebelled against Emerson's transcendentalist thought and really argued against many of the things, or tried to exemplify issues with Emerson's thought. Now, The Confidence Man, the passage goes, and poets send out the sick spirit to green pastures like lame horses turned out unshod to the turf to renew their hooves. A sort of yarb doctors in their way, poets have it that for sore hearts as for sore lungs, nature is the grand cure. But who froze to death my teamster on the prairie, and who made an idiot of Peter the well boy? The Melvillian connection will prop up also in this story. So, from these passages, we do get a feeling, a sense, nature, the concept of nature, our relationship to nature, is an important aspect of Butcher's Crossing. Butcher's Crossing follows the story of William Andrews, a young Harvard student who is taking some time off from his studies, or I believe he's recently graduated, and he wants to go out west. He wants to have a connection to nature, a real, tangible, raw connection to nature. And he finds himself in Butcher's Crossing, which is sort of a crossroads from the east to the west. This is in the late 19th century, and this is a time where buffalo hunting was quite prevalent, where buffalo roamed by the tens of thousands on the Great Plains, and Kansas really opens up the world to the Great Plains. And he finds himself a person to take him buffalo hunting. And he has to obviously do a lot of this work, a lot of this grunt work. And he, being a Harvard man, he really wants to get in the thick of it, but he doesn't really have the capabilities, at least initially. It takes him time to develop these hardy capabilities that many of these men have honed for decades. Many of these men have traveled to Wyoming and very far, rugged areas of the United States, and have had to go through many brutal things, such as Charlie Hogue, who is an alcoholic older man who accompanies them on this journey, and he is an amputee. He doesn't have one of his hands because it got so badly frostbitten that it had to be amputated. So there is a brutality in this world. However, one of the things I do here, a note on the brutality, I've heard some places, or it seems I get the impression from some people, that Butcher's Crossing very often gets compared to Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian. To me, they're both set in Westerns. They're both in many ways anti-Westerns, but they're different stories, completely different stories. Cormac McCarthy's story is a bit of a parable, a bit of a warning sign to the world, but also a very, very silent book, a silent novel, and one that is very much approaching postmodern in many ways. This is not postmodern by any means. This is a traditional novel, and people often will say Butcher's Crossing is just as brutal as Blood Meridian. I mean, no. In Butcher's Crossing, there's no scenes where babies are like bashed on the ground or bashed together, or people are just scalped for no reason, and in such a ambivalent and matter-of-fact, simple way. These extreme hyperbolic scenes of brutality don't find themselves in Butcher's Crossing. There is a slaughter of buffalo that occurs, a significant slaughter of buffalo that is described as kind of nihilistic and a bit of senseless. But it's not completely senseless in the sense that they are trying to extract these pelts, these buffalo skins, which people out east will pay very good money for. And that's why they engage in this hunting trip that takes them weeks to get to a good area. This is an area that the leader of the hunting party, Miller, has been essentially dreaming of. He's been thinking about this area because he's been there before. Many years before, Miller, the leader of this party, stumbled across was described as a sort of plateau, a little area that's kind of tucked away in the Colorado territories where just thousands of buffalo lay grazing. And Miller has been thinking about this area, about all the buffalo there, about all the skins that they can get there. And when Andrews inquires to find a party, he is required to pay money to basically fund this party himself. And he goes as far to do it, and he's not very tied to the money. It's not a big deal to him, the money. But he funds this operation, Andrews. Meanwhile, Miller, though, manages it and buys all the things. He buys the wagons, he buys all the feed, he buys the loads of coffee and gunpowder that they're going to use. They're drinking coffee almost all the time in this story. So it does give a sense of a very realistic take of this time period. Now, why is it, though, that Andrews is going here? What is this story revolving around? And it's different from Blood Meridian in many ways, because in Blood Meridian we get no idea about what is going on in the minds of these characters. With Andrews, there is a tension. There is something that he wants. And when described, when he first approaches MacDonald, who is a skin buyer, someone who funds essentially parties to go get the skins, and he's essentially a businessman in Butcher's Crossing, he first approaches MacDonald to try and join his, get some way of being involved in a party. When MacDonald asks him why he came, what's his reason, there's a passage in which Andrews tries to understand this. He tried to shape in his mind what he had to say to MacDonald. It was a feeling, it was an urge that he had to speak, but whatever he spoke he knew would be but another name for the wildness that he sought. It was a freedom and a goodness, a hope and a vigor that he perceived to underlie all the familiar things of his life, which were not free or good or hopeful or vigorous. What he sought was the source and preserver of his world, a world which seemed to turn ever in fear away from its source, rather than search it out, as the prairie grass around him sent down its fibered roots into the rich dark dampness, the wildness, and thereby renewed itself year after year. Suddenly, in the midst of the great flat prairie, unpeopled and mysterious, there came into his mind the image of a Boston street, crowded with carriages and walking men who toiled sluggishly beneath the arcs of evenly spaced elms that had been made to grow. It seemed out of the flat stone of sidewalk and roadway. There came into his mind the image of tall buildings packed side by side, the ornate cut stone of which was grimed by smoke and city filth. There came into his mind the image of the River Charles winding among plotted fields and villages and towns, carrying the refuse of men and city out to the great bay. So there is a sense of escaping something. Andrews is seeking to escape something, to go somewhere. But throughout this story, it becomes the question of perhaps, is he trying to escape himself? Is he trying to escape certain thoughts of himself, perhaps thoughts of inadequacy within himself? In many ways, this story can be seen as a large drama regarding desire. Now, I mentioned desire because Andrews has a almost immediate connection with a prostitute in Butcher's Crossing called Francine, and it's clear he's very attracted to her. However, he struggles sexually with her, even though she seems to want his company for free. He doesn't have to pay for her company, but sexually he's very, very conflicted, and he struggles with it. In a way, he struggles with these desires, and Francine continues to be a theme, and she shows up at the end as well. So even throughout this large swathe of the novel where Francine is not present, she is still recalled in his mind. She shows up in his mind, and there is a drama in regards to desire, sort of natural carnal desires that Andrews is trying to perhaps attain a sort of he's trying to retain an individuality, yet wants to allow someone else into his life, wants to allow someone else to love. Because it seems that love, in many senses, obliterates an individuality, and that's what Andrews fears, this idea that perhaps love might obliterate him, he might lose himself. Even though as to whether he really loves Francine or whether she really loves him, to her it seems like it's just, I like you, you're cute, you're a bit different. With him, it's something very, very grand to overcome, is her. The character of Miller is one of the most interesting characters in the story, and he does appear very Melvillian. The Melville connection is not a bad one. He seems quite inspired by Ahab, I would say, Captain Ahab. Now, I have not read Moby Dick. However, I know enough about Moby Dick to know the character of Ahab, to know that this is a very, very distinct character that is showing up in American literature. This sort of monomaniac, this character that has a set desire in his head, and he seems to revoke other earthly desires. He doesn't really, Miller seems to be a character that doesn't care for sex or women, unlike other men in Butcher's Crossing. I don't think there's any mention of a woman in his life. He's very at ease with women, very at ease with people. He's very at ease with what he desires in his life, and he has a conception of the world in his life that is steadfast, that is solid. And it is this conception of being out in the wilderness, being a rugged man. And whether it's monetarily that's really a driving force for Miller, I'm not sure if it really is. It doesn't seem to be the case. Because when they spend their nearly half a year in this by this plateau, by this area where the buffalo are at, Miller is very much in his zone, and he seems in some ways possessed by the wilderness. He's not like howling to the moon or doing anything like that, but he seems quite oddly restless, but at the same time very filled with life and purpose. So much so that he's the one that is shooting these buffalo for the most part. He's the main hunter, the shooter, and the other folks are skinning the buffalo. But he seems to become at one with the nature, at one with this sense. And during this buffalo slaughter, which gets extended because they get snowed in and they can't descend the mountain. It's not exactly a mountain, but the path, this plateau, when they can't descend it, time starts to move slowly at first, but then move very quickly. And there's a sense of time perhaps becoming out of loop in this story as well. When they return back to Butcher's Crossing, what will they know? The whole town, it's only been half a year, but the whole town has, a bit more than half a year actually, the whole town has changed. Many people are not there anymore. Many people don't remember Miller, even though he was a very well-known figure in Butcher's Crossing. And the industry has shifted as well. People are not buying buffalo pelts anymore. And this creates a massive psychic collapse for Miller, because this is the world that he has crystallized in his mind. This rugged world of going out there, getting these pelts. He is this type of man. And the change becomes too much for him. So there's a sense of things constantly changing and moving, but that there is always going to be a little emptiness. Here's where there's an existential aspect to it. There's always going to be an emptiness in it. And even when Andrews returns, he recognizes this. McDonald, the businessman, tells him that. He says that you're brought up with lies. Lies told by your parents, then your teachers, then society, everyone, and all of that. It's just a whole bunch of lies, and you've got to live your lies. But in the end, you know that there is just an emptiness within you. And it's what we do in that emptiness, I guess, that John Williams sort of implies. That within that emptiness, we have our desires, we have what we want to get out of this world, and it's how we can best attain that, how we can best be at ease with ourselves, and know ourselves the best. So as well, Emerson would say, trust thyself. Now, Nothing is sacred but the the composition of your own mind, something to that effect. So that is Butcher's Crossing by John Williams. If you guys enjoyed, take care.